Hello, welcome back in another series in our TOEFL IBT preparation course. In our lesson today, we will be looking at the listening section. Are you ready? Let's start. And as usual, before we jump in to the things that we will learn, let's look at the outline of our lesson. So we will have an overview of the section, and then we will discuss the general tips, followed by the question types in the listening section. And then, of course, the key strategies to tackle them. And finally, we'll take a look at the performance descriptors for this section. All right. So let's start with the overview of the TOEFL IBT listening section. So this section in the TOEFL IBT is aiming to assess your academic listening skills. And this includes your ability to understand academic lectures and long conversations in academic situations. Now, the listening will incorporate or use natural speech, such as hesitations, false starts, and etc. And you will be allowed to take notes. And in fact, you should take notes because you will only be able to listen to the audio for once. And after that, you will answer the questions based on what you remember from the listening if you don't take notes. So that's why it's very important. As for the format of the section, most of the questions will be multiple choice. There are a couple of questions that are not exactly a multiple choice type. We will see them later. In the listening section, you will either get 3 lectures or 4 lectures, depending on whether the test is a short format or a long format for the listening section. Each of these lecture will have 4 to 5, uh, will last for 4 to 5 minutes, and there are around 500 up to 750 words with it. And from each of the lecture, you will get 6 questions. Now, that's for the lecture's materials. Beside that, you'll also listen to conversations. There are 2 to 3 conversations, 3 minutes long, and there will be around 12 to 25 exchanges between the speakers in the conversations. There are 5 questions for each, and it will take, the whole section will take 41 minutes for the short format and 57 minutes for the longer format. Okay. So that's the overview of the listening section. Now, moving on to talk about the listening materials. So what kind of materials will you hear or listen in the listening section? It will be conversations and lectures. Conversations, for example, like you see here, it will be something that normally happens in a university campus. Okay, and the common 2 types are office hours conversations and service and contests. Office hours, for example, when a student comes to a professor office and to discuss their assignment. Service encounters, for example, when a student talks to a librarian to sort out a problem they have when borrowing books or something like that. And again, 5 questions for each. And on the other hand, in the lectures, it will be, of course, something that we usually see in a classroom. Okay, and it is mainly a monologue in that only the professor speaking, but sometimes you will hear the students interacting. And all of the topics in the lecture will be something in the introductory level courses. Okay, and this can be from any of these courses, for example. Now, here are some useful tips for you to prepare. So first of all, prepare yourself by attending free lectures online or listening to academic talks. Now, this will help you to improve your familiarity and getting to know the kind of situation or the kind of atmosphere, what is that? The kind of words that you will hear in that kind of talks, okay, especially for the lecture type. And then practice and improve your note-taking skills. So again, taking note is very important for this section because it is almost impossible to remember all of the key information that you will need to answer the questions. All right. And taking note here is not just about writing as much as possible from what you hear, but more about knowing which to take notes on, identifying the important ideas and uh, information that will likely be asked in the questions. Get familiar with the directions, okay, or the instructions, because it will save you time if you don't have to read it on the actual test. And there will be a help menu provided for you. Don't waste your time by going over or checking this too many times, because in the help menu, it's basically just a summary or a recap of the same questions or directions that you get in the questions. Now, let's see the question types in the TOEFL IBT listening section. So first of all, the format of the questions. So all of the questions will be multiple choice mostly, with more than one correct answer, aka A, B, C, D, right? And then, yeah, as you can see there. And then the questions that require you to put in order events or steps in a process. So as I mentioned before, you will get maybe two types of questions that are different from the general multiple choice here. So this is an example. You have to put in the order of events, or you have to categorize things, checking a table or a chart based on the information you hear from the listening. Okay. Okay, now here are all of the question types in this section. So we have three categories: basic comprehension questions with the three types, GIS content, purpose, and detail; pragmatic understanding questions with these two types, understanding the function and speaker's attitude; and then the third one is connecting information questions with the three types of questions, namely understanding organization, connecting content, and making inferences. So what do they mean? Let's take a look. Starting with the basic comprehension questions, the GIS content question. So this type of question will ask you to will see your ability to understand the general topic or main idea from the listening. Okay, here's an example of the question. What is the lecture mainly about? So you see, it's asking about the main idea, and that is an example of the phrasing. Beside that, it usually also phrased this way. Okay. And then the tips for this is the first one: you need to eliminate choices or options that only cover small part in the listening, okay, making it a minor idea, not main idea. And then you need to summarize the topic of the lecture in one phrase or sentence. Sometimes if you challenge yourself to do that, you will, if you understand the listening, you will be able to find something that is similar from the option. Okay, now for the GIS purpose, this is slightly different because this one wants to see if you can identify the purpose or the reason why the conversation or the lecture happens. Okay, here's an example. Why does the man go to see the professor? So it's not exactly about the topic, but more about the reason. And this reason sometimes can be different from the main idea in the listening. So here are the example phrasing or how they word the questions. And the strategies or the tips are first, for the conversation between student and professor, you need to make sure you don't miss identifying the reason why the student comes to see the professor. It is almost always asked in the question. And then don't miss the purpose of a conversation, okay? And it's not always related to the conversation's main topic, so be careful. Like what I explained before, sometimes the reason why the student comes to the professor is different from the main idea that they are talking about after they meet. And then the last one here is for conversations between campus clerk or officers and students, keep in mind that the conversation is typically or usually about the students trying to solve a problem. By knowing this, you will be readier to identify the important information from their conversation. Now, moving on to the detailed question, and this is still in the category of basic comprehension questions. So as you can see from the examples, these questions ask you to understand and remember specific information from the lecture or conversation. So here are the example questions wording. So they are usually given in this kind of sentence or question. And then the strategies for this is number one, you need to make sure you write notes. You take notes on the important information you hear from the listening. And then use that to answer the questions later, okay? And be careful because the answers are usually using different words with the same meaning or point from what you hear in the lecture or conversation. So, and in fact, be careful if you see something that is too similar or it's almost the same but different from what you hear, then that is usually a wrong answer, a trap, okay? And then the last one is to guess by choosing most consistent answer with the main idea. So if you totally miss the information for the question, you can try to guess by choosing an answer that is most connected or relevant to the main topic of the conversation. Okay, moving on to the second category, the pragmatic understanding question. And this one is about the function question. Why does the professor say something? So this type of question will ask you to identify the function, okay, of what the excerpt, what is that, trying to cover, okay? So here are some examples of the wording. What does the professor imply when he says something? And then there will be a replay. And then why does the student say this with a replay? And why does the professor mean? What does the professor mean when she says this? Okay, so this is not exactly the correct image for this, so you can ignore this. This is an example of the following type of question. Now, for this type of question, the tips is simple. Remember that the function of what is said may not match what the speaker directly states. Okay, so sometimes when someone says I'm happy, it doesn't always mean that they are really happy. Sometimes there is like sarcasm Okay, so it's a hidden uh, function, for example. All right. And there's also something like rhetorical question. When a professor asks a student a question, but not exactly wanting an answer. Okay. Sometimes professors ask a question to introduce the next topic that he or she wants to explain. So be careful with that kind of uh, tricky, misleading use of language. Okay, now, speaker's attitude question is, as the name suggests, asking if you can understand a speaker's attitude or opinion. Okay, here's an example. What is the student's attitude toward the people he currently works with? Okay, so attitude here means opinion or feelings. So that's an example of the phrasing, but other than that, there are many. There are some other different phrasings. And the strategy for this is to pay attention to the speaker's tone. Tone here means the inflection, the up and down of the intonation from the speaker. Because sometimes our tone, our word is positive, but our tone is with low tone. Even a positive statement can mean negative, for example, right? So that's what this means. And you need to also consider some general or usual attitudes used. For example, apologetic, confused, enthusiastic, and so on. Okay, now in this example over here, you can see, imagine that the student's saying this, okay? And it's more hours, which bookstores, I mean, it's a decent job and all. Everybody I work with, that part's great. It's just, I mean, I'm selling books and kind of hanging out and not doing much else. If it weren't for the people, it'd be totally boring. So you see, this last sentence here gives the answer for this question. But if you only focus on the word such as boring and also the tone, you will think that he has negative attitude towards the people he currently works with, but actually he doesn't, right? Because he says if it weren't for the people, it'd be totally boring. So this means that uh, he likes the people he works with. Therefore, the answer is the second one here. Okay, so that's the tricky part there. Okay, moving on to the understanding organization questions. So here it will be asking about how the professor in the lecture usually organizes their lecture. Is it from theory and then examples, or is it one concept or theory and then the opposing concept or theory, or is it chronological order, etc.? Okay, so basically it's asking about the relationship between two parts of the listening. Okay, so here are some examples wording. How does the professor organize the information about something? How is the discussion organized? Why does the professor discuss something? This is the example of that. And then why does the professor mention something? Now, the strategy for this or the tips is, again, use your notes to help you identify the key information. And then sometimes the comparisons that the professor makes in the listening will help you to understand the way he or she organizes his or her lecture, right? Okay, the next one, this is the last one in the connecting information questions, I believe. It's about connecting content questions, okay? So this type of question is usually the one with a chart or a table. It asks you to identify the relationships between information or ideas in a lecture. So here are some example wordings for this. What is the likely outcome of doing procedure X before procedure Y? Or what can be inferred about X? What does the professor imply about X? All right. Now, the tips for this is fill in a chart or table or put events in order fall into this category. So you need to remember that this type of question is about connecting content. And then to help you with this, the best tip or the best strategy will be to arrange your notes in the way the information is presented in the lecture. So if at the beginning of the listening, you hear that the professor will be talking about 3 classifications of something, then on your note, you can then draw tables with 3 columns, for example, right? In anticipation to the organization of the information in the lecture. Okay. Now, the next one is still about connecting from information questions, and this one is about inference questions. Okay, so similar to the inference question in the reading. So this question will ask you to identify the implied information, okay, from the listening. So here's an example. What does the professor imply about the orbits of Triton and Nereid? Right now, so you need to make a conclusion based on the facts or information that you hear in the lecture or conversation. Okay, so here are the example ways they word the question. And then the tips for this is that you need to put together the information from the lecture or conversation to reach a conclusion. Okay, so again, make conclusion based on the information from the listening. And keep in mind that it's always a restatement, okay? Restatement or paraphrase or synonyms. If you see something that is too similar to what you hear, that is usually a trap or a trick option. So choose something that are usually something you didn't hear, but the idea and the information is in line with the ones in the listening. Okay, so how do you improve your listening skills to tackle the TOEFL IBT listening section? So first of all, you need to improve your listening for basic comprehension skill, okay? And you can do this by increasing your vocabulary, especially academic vocabulary. Remember, all about TOEFL IBT is academic. Focus on the content and flow, and do not pay too much attention to the speaker style and delivery. You can also predict what the speaker is going to say next, so that you are in a you are in a better standby mode, so to speak. Listen actively by asking yourself questions. So while you're listening, if you have the time to, and also if you can divide your concentration, you can use some of your concentration to ask yourself, okay, so that you can listen actively, such as, why is this professor talking about this? What will the students feel about this, etc. Okay. And then take note, okay, main idea, major points, and important details, because they will likely be asked in the questions. And also you can practice summarizing main ideas from listening. So in your preparation practice, listen to academic talks or lectures, and then try to summarize main ideas from the listening after you listen to it. Now, for pragmatic understanding comprehension skill, you need to think about the purpose of the speech or conversation. So um, you can do that usually at the beginning. After you hear something at the beginning, try to think why they are having the conversation or why the professor is talking about something. And then pay attention to the way the speaker talks. This one is related to their attitude, okay? And you can identify this from their tone or intonation, whether they're perhaps confident or hesitate or uh, uh, worried or confused, etc. Also, pay attention to how sure the speaker is. You can do that by focusing on their tone again. Stress and intonation is important. And also, of course, the way they express the agreement or disagreement or suggestions in implied ways. All right. Okay, now for the connecting ideas question, these are the things you can do to improve your preparation for the questions. First, think about how the lecture is organized. Again, is it in chronological order, or is it a theory and then examples, or is it a theory and then opposing theory, contradicting theory, something like that. Identify the relationships between ideas in the listening. Listen for words that show connections and relationships. Try to predict what information or idea will be covered next. Don't forget to make an outline on your note to keep track of the information you hear. And then also be careful with changes. Sometimes the lecturer will change their topic, okay? And this changing in topic will usually be asked in the question. Such as, for example, why did the lecturer mention about birds when he or she was explaining about airplane? So that's an example of a digression, and the professor usually does that to give an illustration using an analogy. Okay. All right. Now, for the test day, you need to practice these strategies and tips. Okay. So when you are taking notes, don't write down every word. Okay. It's not about how much you can write, but it's about um, the important ideas or details. Okay. And then be familiar with the directions. Make sure you know them before you see them in the real test. Pay attention to the way the lecture is organized and the ideas are connected. And remember, you cannot go back to the previous question. So make sure you are ready to answer and then move on to the next question. Okay, so those are some general tips. Now let's see the key strategies to tackle the listening section. Strategy number one, you need to improve your concentration. Focus on the speaker and on your notes. You will hear something in the background because normally you will do the test along with other test takers. And the surroundings of the test center could be noisy, and this could, impact you negatively in terms of your concentration. So you need to practice focusing. even though your surrounding is disrupting. Okay. And then the second strategy is you need to practice listening for ideas. Okay. So when you get a word that is difficult for you from the listening, do not uh, do not focus too much on that. Okay. Or do not be preoccupied with that. Because if you focus on only individual words that you don't know, you will miss the main ideas and information that you need to answer the questions. Don't lose your concentration when the speaker uses a difficult word, okay? And don't stop to think about it. Just focus on the continuation and try to get the main idea from the listening. The third strategy is to differentiate between the main topic in a lecture or conversation and the minor topics. Okay, so sometimes the lecture or conversation will talk about a minor topic in the beginning, usually, okay, such as classroom business or a preview about the previous lecture or other minor things that are not the main topic. Okay, so this is usually the trap, one of the trap questions, answers in the options. Here's an example, as you can see. Okay, so the question is asking, why does the man go to see the professor? So this is about the main topic. Why is he there? But let's listen to the question so that you can also be familiar with the narrator.
Why does the man go to see the professor?
Okay, now let's listen to an excerpt of the conversation so that you can try to answer the question.
Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
Hi, Professor Mason. Do you have a minute?
Yes, of course, Eric. I think there was something I wanted to talk to you about, too.
Probably my late essay.
Ah, that must have been it. I thought maybe I'd lost it.
No, I'm sorry. Actually, it was my computer that lost it, the first draft of it. And, well, anyway, I finally put it in your mailbox yesterday.
Oh, and I haven't checked the mailbox yet today. Well, I'm glad it's there. I'll read it this weekend.
Well, sorry again. Say, I can send it to you by email, too, if you like.
Great. I'll be interested to see how it all came out.
Right. Now, I just overheard some graduate students talking. Something about a party for Dean Adams?
Retirement party, yes. All students are invited. Wasn't there a notice on the anthropology department's bulletin board?
I don't know, but I wanted to offer to help out with it. You know, whatever you need. Dean Adams, well, I took a few anthropology classes with her, and they were great, inspiring. And, well, I just wanted to pitch in.
Oh, that's very thoughtful of you, Eric, but it'll be pretty low-key. Nothing flashy. That's not her style.
So there's nothing?
No, we'll have coffee and cookies. Maybe a cake, but actually a couple of the administrative assistants are working on that. You could ask them, but I think they've got it covered.
Okay.
Okay, so why does the man go to see the professor? Now, in the beginning of the conversation, if you only use that information to answer the question, I'm sure you will choose the first one, to hand in a late assignment. But that is not the main topic. That is just a classroom business or minor thing at the beginning. Okay, so after they talk about the minor thing, which is the student's late essay, the student continues expressing his reason for coming to see the professor, which is to volunteer with the farewell party or event for a professor leaving the campus. So the answer is D. All right. So be careful with minor topic. It's usually given in the beginning of the conversation. Okay,
Why?
the next strategy, pay attention to the words on the blackboards. In the lecture questions, you will see words shown on the screen on your computer, like these examples here. Now, when you see these words, make sure you copy the words in your notes and try not to miss the information when the lecturer explains that word. Okay, it is almost always be used or be asked about in one of the questions. Strategy number 5, watch for ovals and squares in the answer choices. This might seem simple, but many past TOEFL students, they make mistakes by not reading the direction. Okay, so to avoid that mistake, you can use this strategy. So if you see the option is with ovals like this, it means you only need to choose one answer. But if you see squares like this, don't forget that you will need to choose more than one. Okay, and make sure you match it with the direction. Sometimes it's more than 2. All right. Strategy number 6, a lookout for verbal signals for important information. So I believe you are wondering, when you hear what I say about when you take notes, it's not about writing all of the words you hear, but it's about writing the important information or main idea, main points. So maybe you're asking, how do I know that this is an important piece of information? The listing usually gives you a clue, and that clue is verbal signals. Okay, so when you hear verbal signals in a lecture or discussion or conversation, listen carefully and take notes about the information with the verbal signals. Okay, now here are some examples of the verbal signals. So these are the verbal signals to draw attention, such as, now this is important, the point is, remember that, the basic concept. For repetition, these two are usually what you will hear, and for restatement, these are the examples. So again, when you hear these signals, make sure you don't miss the information following the signals. Those points of information will be likely asked in the questions. So that's how you identify if information is important or not. Strategy number 7, identify the purpose of a question in a conversation or lecture. So with rhetorical questions to clarify or expand on a piece of information. So sometimes the professor will ask a question called rhetorical question. Rhetorical question is a question that is not asked to get an answer from the people you speak with. Okay, so this question is usually used to clarify or to continue a discussion of something. And this is a very common question that a professor uses in a lecture. So here's an example. So when a professor asks a question to introduce a subtopic, okay, so it may sound like this. Okay, so why did the Bantu people move? Well, the drying up of Sahara forced them to blah, blah, blah. So you see, the professor is asking this question why did the Bantu people move? Not because he doesn't know that, or not because he wants the student to answer it, but because he wants to introduce or clarify or expand the information with the following one. Okay, so be careful with this type of question. And there's usually a question about this kind of question, asking why did the professor ask about why Bantu people move, for example. And then there are also questions to confirm rather than to inquire, all right? So for example, when a librarian asks a student to confirm whether the students knows where to look for a book. Do you know where section C is? Okay, let me take you there. Why does the librarian say this? Do you know where section C is? Does she would she like to know where the section C is, or would she like to check if the student knows where the section C is? So be careful with that. The next strategy, pay attention to intonation and speaker's attitude. This is especially important for attitude questions. And sometimes the intonation changes the meaning of the word spoken. Okay, for example, a rising intonation at the end of a sentence or a statement can mean surprise. Okay, here's an example for you. So listen to this and try to identify the difference. That's a good deal for a meal plan. And that's a good deal for a meal plan. So you see, the changing of intonation significantly changes the meanings of the statements. And the question will usually ask about this. So what does the man or the student mean when he says, that's a good deal for a meal plan? Okay, so he is surprised. Okay, and here's another example, but that's the point. Okay, so here's an example. What is the man's attitude toward his current assignment? Okay, so pay attention to his intonation. Okay, that will tell you how he feels or his opinion or attitude about the assignment.
But you'll see why it's still powerful, dramatically speaking.
Well, there must be something about it, or the professor wouldn't have assigned it. I'm sure I'll figure it out.
Okay, so he says at the end, well, I'm sure I'll figure it out. Now, that intonation implies or means that he is confident, right? That sounds confident. He sounds confident when he said that. So that intonation can help you identify the correct answer, D. He is optimistic that he will learn to appreciate the play he is researching.
But you'll see why it's...
Okay, strategy number 9, listen for tone of voice to express emotion. Okay, so many of the questions in the listening will also ask about the speaker's emotions. And for this type of question, try to remember these examples, okay? Enthusiastic, interested, reserved, confused, apologetic, unsure, respectful, encouraging, and supportive. Make sure you know what they mean, and then so when you get this question, you can match it with the tone of the speaker. Strategy number 10, listen for speaker's second thoughts or change of decision. Okay, now a common trap that the TOEFL listening uses is a changing decision. Okay, so speaker says something and then they change their minds immediately. That is called a reversal. Now, you will see reversal or you will hear reversals, and make sure that you understand the original idea, okay, or the mistake that the speaker made before the reversal. will be one of the incorrect choices. All right. Here's an example for you. So uh, imagine that someone asks me, would you like to go out for a lunch? And then I said, sure. And then immediately I said, oh, hold on a minute. I have a class at the moment, so maybe next time. So sure, when I said sure, that would be one of the choices. Okay, so sure, he would like to go. That would be one of the traps or the distractors in the question. So here are some of the common phrases or words to show this kind of reversal language, such as, oh, wait, yeah, like the one I used, and then, oh, sorry, or oops, or I mean, or something like that. Be careful with that. The next strategy is to make connections between concepts and explanations or illustrations, such as analogy. Okay, so this is one example in the digressions. Remember, sometimes the lecturer or professor will change topic and talks about different things. Well, it may seem off topic, but sometimes the illustration or the things they explain has a purpose. Okay, it can be an example of a concept, a comparison, or other related reference. Okay, now think about why the professor includes the reference and try to make a connection. Okay, here, for example, the professor is talking about, say, sociology topic, but he then uses an analogy of alligators. So you will get a question about these kinds of use of off-topic information. So make sure you know the purpose or the reasons or the connections between the off-topic information and the lecture. The next strategy is to identify the functions of speech and replace. So it's a very common question. You will usually get at least one from each of the listening materials in the listening section. So you will hear a replay of a short part from the lecture or conversation, and the question will ask you why the professor or the student say that. Okay, now for this, you need to identify the functions. So listen again to part of the conversation or lecture, and then identify the function of the sentences and questions that you hear. Here are examples of functions. So the purpose could be because the professor shows agreement or shows apology or assumption, complaint, and so on. So you need to know what these functions mean so that when you get a question like this, you are prepared to answer. Strategy number 13, design your notes, okay? Especially for the lectures. Now, you need to recognize the organization of a lecture as soon as possible so that you can adjust your notes to match or to be suitable with the lecture. Okay, so for example, at the beginning of the lecture, you hear the professor would like to talk about the different characteristics of folk tales and fairy tales. So you can directly identify that it will be about a comparison, right? It will be about a comparison or contrast between folk tales and fairy tales. So when you are designing your notes, outline especially, you can draw something like this. You can draw 3 columns, and then folk tales and fairy tales on 2 of them, and then the information in 1 column. So you'll be easier to follow the lecture and note the important information accordingly. And of course, the outline should be different when it's about a definition and description, or chronology and process, which will be more like a timeline, something like that. Okay. Okay, now strategy number 14 is, of course, to practice a lot. So do practice tests of the TOEFL IBT listening section. And then don't forget to apply and practice using the strategies. Okay, take notes of your challenges. And as the test day comes closer, you can focus on tackling those challenges. Okay, so that's about the strategies. Now, let's see what your score will mean in the listening section. So the first one, the highest level or the highest score between 22 to 30, meaning you answered 73 up to 100% of the questions correctly. And if you get this level score, that means that you are in the C1 level in the CFR. And if you get the score of 28 up to 30, then that can mean that you are in the highest level. And if you are an advanced level listening student, that means that you can understand conversations and lectures that take place in academic settings. And you can understand it, you can understand a lecture or conversation that is organized in complex or complicated ways. Okay, and here are the details of that. You can pause the video and read each of the points in more details if you'd like to. The lower level after the advanced is the high intermediate level. And a test taker gets in this level if their score is between 17 to 21, meaning they could answer 56 to 70% of the answers correctly. And your CFR level will be B2 for this level. And what does this mean? Well, if you are a high intermediate level, then you can understand the main ideas and important details of conversations and lectures. Okay. But you can only do so if the information, intonation, and sentence structures can be tracked across sequences. Okay. And also lectures and conversations that are dense or filled with information may present difficulty if the information is not emphasized or clarified. And here are more details on that. The next level under the high intermediate is the low intermediate level, whose score range is 9 to 16, meaning the test taker could answer 30 to 53% of the questions correctly. And the CFR level is B1. So if you're a student in this level, it means that you can understand the main idea and some important details from the conversations and lectures. Okay, so, and usually you can understand complex ideas if it's significantly emphasized or clarified. Okay, you can read the details in the points if you wish. Okay, and the lowest level is the below low intermediate level for those who score between 0 up to 8. And the students in this level simply show that they cannot reach the low intermediate level yet. And that may mean that they have to improve their basic listening skills and English in general. All right. And that would be all for our series for this lesson. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next series.